Ah, there we go, we're on. Okay. So, sorry, I have to go in front of this. So here we are. We're going to begin our interview, and I'm Margaret Frondorf,
yes.
and I'm the SAIS Alumni Director, and I'm here with Mary Lee Lincoln McIntyre Parker,
yes.
The class of 1956, Bologna. And so welcome, Mary.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mary Lee.
Yes.
And so I would love to know what brought you to SAIS in the 50s.
Really? Well, I had tried to have, after I graduated, I had to go get a job to support myself. And I realized I didn't have very many skills that were marketable with just a BA degree. And for a woman to be taken seriously in the job market, she just needed more credentials, academic or skill or something. And I tried to learn, what do you call it, where you take down testimony with a machine.
Shorthand or?
Something like that.
Yeah.
And I didn't do very well at that because I found a job working for court reporters downtown Philadelphia for $40 a week, and I was supposed to be the office manager and handle all their appointments for when they had to appear in court or create depositions or to handle depositions. And that's what essentially the job of the court reporters was, because they were experts at all this. And it was not that inspiring. And I decided I needed to go to do something more, and I looked up courses at University of Pennsylvania, and I took them at some afternoon, some evening, and my boss found out about it, and he fired me because I was taking time away from the office. And at first he seemed amenable to it because I didn't hide it. I told him I wanted to do this, and I thought it would make me a more valuable employee, but apparently not. And so he just let me go one afternoon. And I was so afraid of telling my mother. I kept the same hours coming into town, and then I was scrambling looking for another job. And I found one at the University of Pennsylvania itself, at the Wharton Graduate Division. And that allowed me to take courses at a very reduced rate. And then I lived at a sorority house, and but not before being found out. And my mother was furious. Oh, anyway. So then I still had a love interest in college. The man I eventually married 50-odd years later. It was homecoming weekend, and I went down to be with him. And the dean, who I didn't care for very much because the previous dean...
This is at the University of Pennsylvania?
No, this was at Washington College in Chestertown.
Oh, Washington. Okay, right.
And so this dean was pretty arrogant, and so he wanted me to come see him in his office, and he wanted to talk about my future goals, and I kept thinking, my God, what future goals? What is a woman supposed to have? And so he said, well, what do you want? What kind of job do you think you'd like to do? I piped up with, well, airline stewardess, because at least I could travel. And he just fumed and flared back at me and said, you're nothing but a glorified waitress. I said, okay. And so he showed me 2 applications for further study. And I had always loved academia. I did reasonably well in it, and I loved history and poli-sci. I read in them independently. And so he pulled up one that was for New York University, but I was ineligible because I wasn't a man. And then he happened to pull out this new one from Johns Hopkins, the Study Center in Bologna, and he said, well, why don't you try for that? It fits in with your interest in international affairs, you like Europe, you like other things about it. And I said to him, I don't know anything about economics. And so I thought if I applied, I'd be turned down on that. Anyway, as fate would have it, I applied. Hopkins called me down to Washington at their old address on Florida Avenue, and I met with Dr. Haynes and a few of the professors. And they asked me about economics, and then they said, would you be willing to do some independent study? And I said, yes. And so Dr. Loftus said, well, I'll recommend some books for you. And so just a few weeks later, they called to say they wrote me actually and said I'd been accepted. And it was a few days before I called my parents, and I said, well, and I called my mother, and I said, are you sitting down? And I said, I've just been awarded this wonderful fellowship, and I sail on the Andrea Doria in February. What? And so I went down to the college over the Christmas holidays to say goodbye to my wonderful friend. And he was very upset, and he didn't understand why I wanted this. I said, look, I've just seen too many women in my lifetime suddenly have to get out and earn a living with very few skills. I don't want to be among that. You know, and I think this will help. But he didn't see it that way, as you know, he was heartbroken. And it seemed right to me. And I thought I was only going to be gone about 4 months, and then he would have finished his college, because he was a year behind me, even though our birthdays were very close. So come June of '55, the school offered me another semester. And I thought, well, what was I going to do? Go back to Penn and try to finish? Or can I do this all in one swoop here and get a real leg up on finishing the work for an MA? So I decided to stay. But I couldn't come home and then return because Hopkins wouldn't pay for that, which is perfectly understandable. And since Françoise and I were the only girls, there were only 10 of us as we began, I decided to stay, and I worked at the office there, and that's how I earned enough money to keep body and soul together, but not before about 10 days there when I really had very little to eat. I had one piece of bread.
Oh my goodness.
And I didn't tell anybody, but I just thought, well, this is what it feels like to starve.
Oh.
I thought I might as well get that under my belt. I didn't have a weight problem then, I just wasn't eating, you know. So I'd have this one piece of hard bread, and I would eat it at about 2:30 in the afternoon. I came to Hopkins because I needed skills, and I thought they could give them to me, either academic or something in public service.
So, in terms of a vivid memory, let's say at the Bologna Center, tell me what comes to mind first. It's your very, very first, very strong, vivid memory of being at the Bologna Center.
I think the very first days I was there before the school started, everybody was going at fever pitch to get this school ready. Because like a lot of deadlines, I had the feeling that some were missed, and people weren't exactly cordial and relaxed. They were very tense because they had to meet certain conditions. The ambassador was going to help open. Claire Ruth Luce was coming. So many dignitaries, not only from the Bologna area, but also internationally, as well as from Italy and from Rome and places like that. And it was all going to be televised, at least not televised, but newsreels, because television was exceedingly rare then. And so you got your news, at least your video news, in the movie theater. And it was like the old newsreels of the 30s and 40s here. And so they had a camera crew there, and of course with loose publications, so they were everywhere. So the school really felt as if they were under the gun. I just remember feeling the pressure and the scrambling to try and get it right.
And what do you remember your first memory of academics and your course work there?
I felt I was sweating bullets. When Dr. Haynes, the very first meeting all of us students had, and he told us we would be working 18-hour days. And I thought, what have I gotten myself into? And there were times when we did do that. but not every single day. He had almost, I think he was trying to scare the bejesus out of us to make us, this was not going to be a vacation or a tour of northern Italy. So we had to really make it pay, we had, for ourselves and for the school, to make it something that, as we were the guinea pigs, we had to make it so that others would want to come. And I think I felt the pressure. I tried to be on my best manners and dress accordingly, because there were no jeans or no pantsuits or anything you could sort of slow around in. And so I had to be dressed, and I had a modest stipend, nothing for clothing allowance or anything like that. So I just tried to stand up straight and go ahead and plaster a smile on my face and hope and pray, we wouldn't trip and fall and make fools of ourselves, And I thought I was quietly amazed at Hopkins to have so much faith in us. I kept thinking, wait a minute, this is kind of a big responsibility here. And so when Dr. Haynes would motion for Francoise and me to come up and shake hands with these wonderful people, and of course they all spoke Italian. I couldn't speak it, but I would just smile and shake their hands and say in English, I'm glad to meet you, and how do you do? And I just hoped that that was sufficient. So far, at least, Haynes didn't shoot me a dirty look or anything like taking my cues from him.
Do you, here we are 10 years out from the war.
Yeah.
A little bit more than 10, and do you remember anything about the sort of the political environment that you were in Italy in those days? Was there anything that comes to mind?
The mayor was communist, and as he was a leftover partisan from the war. But the surrounding area, the city of Bologna itself was not communist. It was Christian Democrat, which was slightly center-right, or at least slightly conservative, because it was wealthy, and the bankers did not want to mess with communists or what they perceived as would be communist takeover and control. And so the city itself, from what we sensed, wanted prosperity, but they didn't want to flaunt it because they didn't want jealousies and so forth and so on. They were aware of how it all played out in the war. They all knew who took what sides. And the Christian Democrats felt they were somewhat clean because they hadn't been monarchists and wayward on the right with Mussolini, and because their motto was libertas, libertas, and at the time that coat of arms was made, it was a freedom against the Pope, who was manipulating all kinds of Italian politics. But in this case, this was meant to be against the communists. And there was one huge communist meeting that was staged later on after all the other students came. And what was it? It was the head of the whole Communist Party, Togliatti, and he was giving a talk. And the people from the countryside, his supporters, the peasants, came in, and I saw a different side of Italy altogether. These were the people who were essentially disenfranchised, and they had every reason to want to topple a government that did not listen to them and was suspicious and did not like them. But these were people.
Were you there?
Oh, yes, we were among the crowd. We went out to see what it was all about. I couldn't follow his argument because he was speaking rapidly and with emphasis and so forth. I got the energy he was exuding, but I didn't get the words. And these very stolid, determined expressions on their faces, because they had had to bicycle in or come on the back of somebody's truck, and they were all sunburned. Their hands were gnarled and blistered and had calluses on them. These were not the elegant, tiptoeing, high-heeled ladies walking down the streets of Bologna. These were not. These were the strong peasants. And for a while there, Italy teetered on that brink as to whether or not they were really going to be part of this Europe that would be non-communist. Because the communists had done, essentially, Italy a favor by booting out the Nazis. They had been the ones to take it on the line to get themselves killed, to put, to really stake everything they had to get rid of these guys. And they were heroes to many of the local people. So it was a bit tense. Bologna was off limits until 1955 to NATO troops for fear of this kind of contamination, political taint. And we were there when the first contingent of soldiers pulled up into the main square, and we went over to see them. We just happened to be free of classes, and so these American GIs were getting off the bus, and we said, "Hey, soldier, where are you from?" And this very serious guy said, "We're from America." He said, "We know that." So we went on to the next bus. We didn't give them much patience there. But it was really kind of insulting of us to do that. But
what a
anyway,
time to be there. What a time to be there.
And so it was exciting to see that. And when you asked that question, I wrote, I had seen 2 days of remembrance for the Day of Resistance, which was April 25th. The first one was the 10th anniversary. And Françoise and I went over, again on the Piazza Maggiore, and there were these pictures, these snapshots of all the people who had been killed. And they were crying openly about that. And I thought, oh God, this is still pretty raw in their memories. And I noticed that when I was there, many decades later, it was just sort of, oh yeah, it was Day of Resistance, so what? It's just another holiday.
Did that political environment that you speak so passionately about find its way into the coursework at Bologna at the time? Were there courses that you took dealing with history and politics, and or if not coursework, later on in life, as you moved through your career, and you had a pretty interesting career working with disenfranchised individuals. Can you talk a little bit about that sort of perhaps that transition from Bologna to your later years in your professional life, and perhaps how there was a connection, if there was one?
By nomenclature, I would not say, I wouldn't link it to the Communist Party. I would link it more to the people who were disenfranchised. And I was very pleased when AID in the early 70s began to see that their development projects, like big things like airport runways or a big dam or big things like that, big capital projects, weren't reaching and changing the lives of the people at the bottom. And so we were going to have to rethink how to do that. And there were no guideposts, there was no map, and we had to do it by trial and error, but always with the idea of helping people at the bottom as the main thing. And I'm very grateful that AID did that, and they're still doing it. So I think even though success wasn't always in the mix, it was an effort where people could see that certain things were done for their benefit. I remember thinking when I was in India, because it was so depressing to see so many desperate people, people walking by with legs like this, and you think, did the whole village have rickets? And the answer is yes. That sometime in their lifetime they would see a change, and not necessarily remember who made it, but that their lives would eventually see some progress, some improvement, because so many people were just busting themselves to see it happen. And I can honestly say that even though in certain situations, like in India, the nearness of their national pride would not let them admit, first of all, that they needed help in the first place, and secondly, that the help came from foreigners, and that third, it might be successful. I thought, well, someday when somebody sits down to write the history of this, it will be brought out that some good-hearted, far-sighted people had the energy, the money, the means to make it happen. And hope that they would see that. Because I read every now and then articles that say, well, there's one topic about does development work? Or words to that effect. And I want to say, hell yes! It has to. Because what are the alternatives? Are you just going to sit there and just while away your time and say, oh, too bad, go eat your chocolate cake? It isn't going to happen like that. And I remember I was attending a small grouping in somebody's living room in Islamabad, and he was talking about a particular experiment. It was a white-haired Pakistani, and he had this little cap on it, the usual dress. And he said, yes, development can come from the top, but the slaves have to free themselves, meaning they had to do it, change their minds, and but with the means to do it, they can do it. And I thought, hallelujah! If he sees that, then there's hope, because he was one of the people, as an influential, educated man, he was going to make sure that it did. And for the life of me, I can't remember what the experiment was called, but he was sort of beating the drums for it. And I thought, well, how brave of him to defy even his own countrymen to say that. And, Dr. Hamid Khan, that's who it was, a great sort of rural development practitioner.
Well, today at SAIS, we have an international development program. So
yes.
what you're articulating now
Yeah.
is examined in the context of various courses within that particular program. So I want you to know that
Hallelujah.
Yes, indeed, you were a pioneer. You were a pioneer.
Well, also the effort that the World Bank and AID tentatively put toward female education. I want to say, wake up and smell the coffee, folks. This is where so much of it is. Because it has, just like Eleanor Roosevelt said, it has to start small, in families, for tolerance for this, and to make a better world.
Now, you talked once again about sort of the passion for the plight and the condition of the poor. But for you, in your career, working in developing countries and with USAID, to sum it up, how would you view your contribution in this vast world that of efforts in international development?
I can't say. You can only just do your best and hope that it has a spin-off effect. You know that you did. It wasn't necessarily that you were doing the work of angels or work of God, because that's their job. But as far as humanly possible, you tried to make a difference. And maybe you'll live to see the positive result, maybe you won't. But I think there's a satisfaction of knowing that you came close to making an effective, positive change for the better in someone else's life.
And Mary, I know that Beirut played a big role in your life, and maybe you can just touch upon that, because I think what I'm hearing is that that sort of appreciation of making a positive change sometimes can stem from a life experience. Or a near-death experience,
Sure.
and so maybe just talk a little bit about Beirut.
My husband's job, because AID did not have a in-depth program there, because it was too risky. You couldn't go out easily to the field, so to speak, without a bodyguard protection. So what we did do was to work with like-minded NGOs, some religiously based, some faith-based, some not. And because they were willing to get out there, live with the people, and to do, again, this kind of, development work. But I have to explain that Lebanon was not like a really third world country where there were just teams of illiterates and teams of starving people, because that did not happen. What it was a middle-class, prosperous fight going on with Israel, with its things, the other countries are Syria, Iran, all doing their own dirty work in Lebanon, much as Italy and Germany suffered when they were making their own efforts to unite and become a country. And there were so many meddling parties in it. That was very discouraging, because these were smart people destroying the country, and they shouldn't have been doing that. And so the situations in Beirut were so different from the desperation we saw in Asia. And after the Israelis invaded in '82, all kinds of little groups sprang up as a result of this sort of intrusion by the Israelis. And of course we had to leave, and I couldn't finish my coursework with the universities where I was working, and I had to get out. We were evacuated. But all kinds of little teeny-weeny groups were, and Hezbollah was one of them. And since its name in translation is Party of God, we thought it was pretty strange. God would not have, if you want to stretch that argument. And then this is some of the risk in developing worlds. It is not safe. And we were very distressed when President Reagan denied us extra protection. He cut some of the Marine Guard, the numbers of the Marine Guard. And we were very vulnerable. It just made us even more so. So if there's anybody I'm really angry at, it's Mr. Reagan for having done that to us. And so when Hezbollah got themselves all revved up, they didn't have far to go for resources. The Saudis, the Iranians, the Syrians, and so forth, they could amass explosives very easily. And they could bribe guards, and the borders were pretty porous. And there were militias stationed all around the country. And so when the attack came, it should have been
the bombing of the embassy.
Yeah, there should not have been a surprise. And our ambassador, who was somewhat of an Arabist, was very, very concerned. He left his deputy ambassador to handle the Israelis and get them sort of taken care of to say that they don't muck up the works. Because their presence was a constant thorn in the side of this very fragile Arab country. And, everybody did their best. And when the attack came, we just didn't know how to count the casualties, because it got all of the CIA.
And your husband?
My husband and certain people in a certain area got everybody except 3 people in the cafeteria where my husband was. He was giving a deep background to Newsweek, to a Newsweek streamer.
And his position?
He was head of, at the moment, he was head of the mission. And so this was a very important interview, which nobody ever heard because both reporter and he perished in it. So it was a wake-up call to realize that certain parts of the world are dangerous, and civilians are going to get killed. And I thought it was a lack of preparation and a lack of foresight, or listening to the dangers that were coming in from CIA and all the other folks feeding into Washington. They just didn't listen.
That's very interesting, because today SAIS students are finding themselves entering those very same kinds of very dangerous positions in Afghanistan and in other places.
Nobody should be in Afghanistan.
Well, where development work is still
I know, it's still going on, but
unfolding. Your advice. So you've been there, you've experienced it, and for young people who are graduating from SAIS and they are considering,
don't let them go. Don't let them go. The Afghans will do what they can to protect you, but when push comes to shove, you're on your own. I would not advise anybody to go there. It's too volatile. People change alliances back and forth. They've done that for they're going to change because there's one Western face there needing help. No, they're not. And so the stakes are much too. Don't send anybody there. Don't send anybody to the outer regions of Pakistan either. They're both tribal. I mean, Afghanistan is wholly tribal. Pakistan just has certain areas like the northwest frontier. Don't send anybody there. Don't. It's too dangerous. Like, send them to India, send them to any other place. That's just too volatile. I would not advise anybody's going there.
So, but more generally, if you were to offer some advice to students on careers, what would you say? What would you tell them?
If they want to work in Asia, what can I say? I don't know that I really have a formula. I would just say stay away from hot spots, because the world is fascinating, but it is not safe. And I know you can walk across the street here and get zapped by a taxi or something. And these weird things happen totally out of the blue. But as a general rule, I would not encourage any. If they want to study the area, do so. And if you have to travel there, please go under guard. Please have some kind of protection, and then get the heck out of there. Because it'll be known that you're there, and you don't know what is amassing against you. You really don't.
So, these are happier times for you now, later in life, marrying your sweetheart from many years ago after so many years. So, I guess what I wanted to ask the question, because we with your SAIS experience going to Bologna and the international education, and I guess I just wanted to ask you if there are any regrets about coming to Johns Hopkins and SAIS.
Oh no, it opened up a different world to me. I felt that if I stayed in the States, this was the 50s now, I would probably marry and be very unhappy just doing housework and not doing anything outside the home. I saw too many women of my mother's generation have to do that because there was nothing else for them. And I felt that they were trapped, and why, if Hopkins was willing to give me the chance, I'm not saying I treated it perfectly or got the most benefit out of it, but it was, okay, the life was difficult, but it was far more interesting. And when I was teaching, that was the career I really loved. And I still see what I didn't probably tell you is that I still see my students. They're middle-aged now, of course I'm senior. And one of them finally told me, I loved the way you taught history. And I said, well, it's the only human story there is. And it's all true. And I just thought, I taught somebody, and they appreciated it in the same way I did. And I have students who come up and just throw their arms around me. I mean, it makes me want to cry. But I truly enjoyed the young people I met, because I was terrified when I first started teaching. I don't know if I told you this. I couldn't stand up, and because my knees were knocking. And when I first started teaching here in D.C., and for those first 3 days I didn't stand up, again, because my knees were knocking. And then I saw Mary June Wall, who she had taught 7th grade, and I was talking to her, and I said, what do you do about the kids messing up and playing around in the back row? And she said, well, you're standing up, aren't you? And I said, I'll try it. She caught me, right, that very first comment. Oh, jeez. So the following Monday, I decided I have to do this. There was just no getting around it. So I stood up, but I needed a prop because my knees were still knocking. So I leaned against the blackboard. I stood beside my desk and leaned on the desk, and I stood on the other side, and I sat on my desk, anything, just to be up, elevated. And then I noticed that by the end of the week, I was energized. And I didn't mind walking up and down in front of a class. And from then on, it gave me the courage to do it. But I'll never forget her saying, "Well, you're standing up, aren't you?" And I thought, oh, God! The very thing I just didn't think I could do.
Well,
But the students, excuse me, were just, they didn't know it, but I was so vulnerable. But they made it interesting. And I'm in their debt, my God. Because they could have just, they could have danced Ring Around the Rosie with me or anything. But they didn't. And they respected me, though why, I have no idea. But it just turned into sort of a quiet love affair between me and them, and I just enjoyed it thoroughly.
Well, it sounds like your overall education and your degree from SAIS, you've taken it in so many places to the world, and bringing it back full circle into your own classroom and inspiring others. It's a nice story that I'm happy that we can share in this interview today. So.
Well, thank you. It's been a very rewarding life. It hasn't always been happy, but it has been very rewarding, and I'm grateful to SAIS for that.
Thank you, Mary Lee.
Oh, okay. It is almost time to